Hi guys, Hero here, and today I'm going to be doing my ultimate review of the Z2E chipset versus the Ultra 7 258V. Let's go. So let's start off with why I want to do this. And the main drivers are really, I'm a data-driven guy, and I've noticed a lot of people are just claiming numbers here and there, everywhere. and I really want to have some stats that I can use and I can be confident about. This is also a good time, I believe, to get a baseline. So we've just had all the mainstream devices release on both these chipsets. So that's stuff like the Xbox LIX, the Legion Go 2, the One X Air, and obviously the MSI Claw A8 and 8AI, which has been launched earlier. The other reason is that we know there are new devices coming out, like the GDP Win 5, and also MSI's newer version of Panther Lake. So we're gonna get a good baseline. So in a couple of months' time, we can compare against the newer devices and say actually how much better or worse are they. Yeah, obviously they shouldn't be worse, but at least we'll have a data point. And the main reason is I couldn't find any sources that would share transparent data around how these things were tested. So, people keep on showing charts around how in one game this was better, but how did they achieve it? What did they do? And, is it actually accurate? So what am I going to do in this test? The key thing, I'm going to be using my two devices that I have access to. So one is obviously the 8AI and the other one is the A8. And I think these are really good devices to actually do this test with. So I'll explain my thinking and why I believe the fair test that represents a fair medium. So the 8AI is obviously the Intel chipset. So that's the Ultra 7 258. And the three devices, the mainstream devices that are using it is obviously the 7 AI and also the One X Air. Now, with Intel, it's a bit more easier because they all have 32 gigabytes of RAM and the same clock speeds, and they also get all the drivers from Intel directly. On the AMD chipset, it's a bit more difficult. Now, while the clocks are the same, the Claw A8 has the basic, I want to call the baseline chipset, yeah? The normal variant of the Z2E. The Xbox LIX has an NPU processor, so for AI-driven activities that Microsoft said that they'll use for some automatic resolution scaling. We'll see that when that happens and what the impact of that is, but let's assume it's the same, yeah? So 24 gigabytes each. Lenovo's taking it a bit differently and decided to go 32 gigabytes, but in the grand scheme of things, in a handheld format, that's not going to make a difference. The what in this video that we're going to cover is literally FPS, because everyone covers FPS, but I want to look at battery life and efficiency and also image quality, because I think all three dimensions added together give you a perfect view. And then we'll talk about any of the considerations, yeah? Now the how. So I'm going to be using games that have in-game benchmarks. The reason for that is that you can then actually repeat it and we can repeat it constantly in the future and we can have a accurate way of measuring things, yeah? I'm also going to be using in-game presets where possible, and I'll make sure that I make them clearly visible, and I'll tell you if I've ever tweaked away from them. And the key thing is there's no frame gen, so we don't have that variation. So the fixed TDPs that I'm going to be using and I'm going to be validating with my overlays are 15 and 25. And the reason I'm using both of them because these are numbers or wattages that all the 6 devices and more devices can ever reach. And normally, and I've seen this, is anything above 25, you seem to start having diminishing returns, and you see that in some of the tests later on where I have pushed it above that. Now, the resolution I'm using is 1080p because this is something that all devices can achieve, and then no one can say, "Oh, Hero, you're using a 1200p versus 1080p." Yeah, I know it's not probably how you're going to play, but this is for benchmarking and baselining for the future. Image quality, so you'll see me capturing image quality directly off the device using OBS. Not something I normally do because I know it affects the FPS. So please don't read the FPS scores and think, oh, highest hero getting higher in his charts than what's shown on the screen. It's not for that purpose. It's mostly for what does the image quality look like? Can you see blurriness? Is there any glitches or whatnot? Yeah. And if lastly, if I do have Bazite, sorry, if I have a game that I have available on Bazite, I'll test that too. Yeah. So let's get going. I'll include chapters like I normally do, so you can click straight to the games that you're interested in. So let's look at our first game, Forza 5. So at 15 watts, both the chipsets are kind of on par, but you can see actually the Ultra 7 is using around 40 watts less power. So when you try to match the and bring it up to 17 watts, you can see that's using the same amount of wattage and you got a 10% increase. This is one of those games I did increase to 35 watts for the Z2E, and you can start seeing the diminishing returns. We'll talk about that a bit later. Now, moving to the in game footage, honestly, I couldn't tell the difference between XeSS and FSR3. I think it's a good implementation on both. It's probably difficult to see the difference because it's a car game and therefore, you're driving around really fast. If you do take the time to pause the video, maybe you can see a bit of detail here and there, especially around the paving roads. But it's very, very difficult to tell. I think in-game footage looks the same. And like I say, if you did and look if you have a look at the overlay, yeah, you can see that yes, the Intel Arc is pulling bit less battery life or wattage. So I think that works out to be around 30 to 45 minutes of extra battery life. Or like I say, the alternative is you can push the total TDP up and try to get a bit more high FPS, but I don't think it needs it for this game. Yeah, I think it's one of those games that you're really gonna enjoy, irrelevant of what chipset you are. The interesting thing is when we actually go to the detail breakdown, you can see that actually on the Z2E you had fewer less stutters. So let's move on to our next Doom the Dark Ages. So Doom Dark Ages was re-released with the Handheld preset ready for the Xbox Ally X launch, and definitely like I said, similar story. When you start off with that same watch, you can see slight differences, but you can say they're on par. But the Z2 is actually doing really well, and so is the Intel chipset. But you do see the efficiency gains when you move up the TDP. In terms of the actual in-game footage, I felt like what's it called? The XCSS implementation is probably piss poor. Yeah, it's probably no. You tell me. I couldn't see any differences. Yeah, and this is one of those good maps that it's raining. There's fog. There's lots of things happening. Um, the footage looks very similar. If you look at the tree bark, can you see a difference? I couldn't see it. Yeah, so in terms of, yeah, this is probably on par. Looks good, really playable now, and I recommend playing this with the new handheld presets, and definitely try this out. You probably do want to stick to 25 watts for this game to have a better time because you can have quite dips with lots of enemies on screen. But yeah, you tell me if you think there's any difference in terms of what's it called, in-game footage for this year. Now, if when we move on to the actual stats itself, you can again see there's a few more micro stutters on the Intel chipset, but it's not visible to me. Yes, it got a bit higher FPS, but there's the balance here. At 15 watts, Z2E lands around 35 FPS on average with 28 on lows. Intel pulls ahead at 39.9 average and 31.9 mins. That's around a 14% jump in average FPS. At 25 watt, the gaps even gets even wider. And you can see with the TDP scaling, with the average overall wattage, the Intel is just strong. So all right, you've seen the Cyberpunk 2027 chart, and straight away you'll notice it was very much biased towards Intel, and that's probably because after patch 2.3 with XeSS 2.2 introduced, both the performance and the image quality does lean towards the Intel Arc 258. Quick apology, I actually messed up on the Intel Arc footage capture for Cyberpunk, so sorry about that. But all the benchmark numbers are accurate, and I double checked the results. and you can see the image quality still on the screen. If you want to replicate this benchmark at home, just use the Steam Deck preset and switch to the upscaler, so XeSS or FSR, and that's why you see custom depending on your GPU. That's the exact setup I use for these runs. So yeah, with patch 2.3 and XeSS 2.2, Cyberpunk 2077 clearly leans towards Intel right now, both in performance and image quality. Let's move on to Wukong, one of my favorite games. At 15 watts, Z2E pulls around 37 FPS at 29 watts total, and Intel hits 43 FPS at 23 watts total. At 25 watts, very similar story. It's 48.7 watts versus 58 watts. And on Intel's only TDP, 19 watts gives you 48 FPS, and 28 watts gives you 55 FPS. So that's the chart, and a few things immediately jump out. Firstly, image quality looks pretty much the same between both GPUs at 1080p low. There isn't any notable difference in sharpness or clarity in Wukong here. But performance, yeah, Intel is ahead at every wattage we can compare. And what's even more surprising is the efficiency. At 15 watts, Intel is not only faster, it's actually using less total system power than the Z2E. Once we move to 25 watts, the lead gets much bigger. Z2 is at 48.7, we mentioned, while Intel hits 58 FPS. And again, Intel is drawing less power overall. So that's a straight efficiency win and performance win. Looking at Intel's only TDP results show strong scaling as well. So you can push up the wattage and still get similar power results or in terms of total power usage, but better FPS scores. So Wukong continues to climb as you feed the 258 more power. If you need to replicate these benchmarks, exactly use 1080p, the low preset, and the correct upscaler of choice, and make sure frame generation is turned off on both devices. Overall, Wukong is visually identical to myself on the two platforms, but Intel does give you the higher performance and better efficiency overall. DuoX at 15 watts, Z2E averaged around 32 FPS, and Intel achieved 30 FPS. At 25 watts, it was a different story where Z2E received 38.9 FPS and Intel hit 42.3 FPS. So DuoX behaves very differently compared to other games in this benchmarks. Right away, remember this game doesn't use FSR or XeSS upscaling technology, and I run everything at high preset at 1080p because this game genuinely looks incredible at that setting. So remember, at 15 watts, the Z2E had a bit of a lead, but when we ramped it up to 25 watts, the roles reversed and Intel pulled ahead. And while it's consuming, and it does so while it's consuming less power. So at higher TDPs, the v258 becomes more efficient and better performing an option. And if you look at the Intel only TDP, 17 watts gives you 36 FPS and 27 watts gives you 42.9 FPS. So V258 has a nice steady scaling curve. So visually, I feel both look identical. Here are the presets, so you can try this for your um, own sake. Because again, this game, I believe this game doesn't use any modern upscaling technology, and the high preset lets the engine shine. So here's the raw data for Tomb Raider Game of the Year edition. The Z2E comes in around 67 FPS and the Intel Arc higher 78 FPS. The rest of the results are very similar to what you've seen before. So the Intel Arc pulls ahead with a bit less power usage. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to include this in the benchmarks because the benchmark itself is extremely short and it only shows you very basic outputs. But look, he looks really nice, and Lara looks great as usual. The other reason was I couldn't get the handhelds to behave at 15 watts because they kept on boosting. So yeah, take these numbers lightly. Tomb Raiders with its built-in benchmark is honestly too short to give a proper apples to apples comparisons. and I couldn't hold the consistent clocks of the lower wattage anyway. So remember, this is an older game. Runs really fine on both handhelds or chipsets, no upscaler. So you can use my settings if you want to test this yourself at 1080p high. Visually, I felt like they look identical. Overall performance is smooth. Um, and yeah, it's a fun data point if you want to test this out yourself. All right, Monster Hunter Wilds, and this one's interesting because there's literally the only game in this entire video where Bazai OS gave the Z2E a huge advantage. Before anyone asks, no, I'm not going to be showing you the image quality because using FSR or XeSS on the lowest quality, this game looks awful. And I think it's a 5-10 minutes benchmark here, which I didn't want to cut down. It's extremely blurry and extremely smeared um, at the lowest preset. So remember, it is free on Steam, so if you really want to go through the pain, you can download it for yourself. Um, and I completely get why it's getting slated. So remember, choose the lowest, set to 1080p, frame gen off, and pick either FSR or XeSS. And honestly, after running this, I completely get why it's absolutely best on the Steam reviews right now. Performance is rough, visuals are rough, and the benchmark gives you zero confidence to actually play the game in a meaningful way. Yeah. So let's move across to the battery life test. So we're going to be running three of my favorite indie games. These tests are quite easy to repeat. So all you want to do is turn off CPU boost, um, fix your frame rate. So you can do that either in game if the game allows you to do that, or use an application such as Riva Tuner. Yeah. And as you can see in these three games I've tested, I'm either running them at 30 FPS locked frame rate or at 60 FPS. And if you're now looking at Hades, you can see that actually the Intel chipset is always running at total low wattage. So if you see it's running at 5 watts versus the AMD Z2E 8 watts. So there seems to be a total 3 wattage difference. And I think I've measured this at game time. You're talking around half an hour to 45 minutes of extra gameplay. And again, now if we're looking at starting value, so this one's running at 60 FPS, but you can see that you can still see that 7 wattage difference. Now, what this means is two things. So yes, you get longer battery life, but also in terms of fan noise, in the Intel, it's either really low or not running at all. Z2E, it's running, but very low as well. So yeah, really interesting. So let's wrap this up. So we've been through a lot of information, but here's my key takeaways. So in terms of efficiency, Intel with its mobile first architecture definitely has the edge. It also has the edge in terms of newer games because it can deliver day one drivers, including pre-shaders, sorry, which seems to be its focus. But there still is some issues with compatibility with older games. We've proven that 25 watts seems to be a good point before you start getting diminishing returns for both chipsets. However, it's not all bad for Z2E. We can see that the Z2E games that do need additional CPU can get a big boost. And Z2E, and I'm going to do a video about this, is still the king in terms of emulation and Bazai or Steam like OS experience. It's interesting to see that Bazai does have an impact, and you can see better scheduling and frame pacing with Bazai, and also the efficiency that you can't get with the Z2E on Windows. You can achieve a similar level with that, so that's something to consider. Obviously, Bazai has its own issues. If you're playing anti-cheat games, you can't do that, but dual load. If a game does have a good implementation of XeSS, believe me, it'll always be better on Lunate because of the advantage it has in terms of the architecture, and you can use its XMSX module. However, if I gotta leave you with something, if you're if you have issues with let's say micro stutters, or you can notice micro stutters, then maybe you want to watch a couple of videos or try to test out the MSI Claw 8 and 7.8, because Intel and Windows does sometimes have frame pacing issues that it's hard to notice, but it's definitely there for some people. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know if you think I could have done anything better or differently, and hopefully we get to do this again when the newer devices come out.